God be with you. Let us pray. Holy Creator, the psalmist acknowledged that we are wonderfully made by you, bodies that you gave us as holy temples to be honored, loved, and respected by ourselves and others. So tonight we gather with concerned minds and troubled hearts about the sin and evil of human trafficking, which fails to honor bodies and honor you. So we gather because we care to be more mindful and vigilant in our work to eradicate this desecration of young bodies. Stir in us the courage and willingness to right this wrong and never make peace with oppression. Help us to teach that our sexuality is a precious gift from you, to be shared with our autonomy and love, never to be shamed, coerced, or harmed by others. Fill us this night with the crown of knowledge, the scepter of boldness to speak when this conversation is not popular, and the proud shoes to journey with our young and most vulnerable of sexual exploitation. You call us every day of our lives to heal those who are broken and give hope to those being consumed with despair. May we never lose sight of the many ways that you have always worked through the people of this city, and may we, in all our work for Atlanta citizens, be a friend to the stranger. May our work tonight as men against sex trafficking, along with the women who work in this way, be inspired and inspire others to build that beloved community, koinonia, preached by a prophet of this city, Martin Luther King Jr. Help us to always to listen to each other and speak the truth in love. I ask all these blessings in your many holy names. Amen. Good evening. I'm Horace Griffin, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Priest for Pastoral Care here at lovely St. Luke's Episcopal Church, where you all are this evening here in downtown Atlanta. And on behalf of our rector, the Reverend Winnie Vargas, and our associate rector, the Reverend Elizabeth Childs Caffey, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who've gathered tonight. Please know that you are welcome in this place. And as I look around the room, I'm especially grateful for the men who showed up as we directed our work to bring men into this work. The women have been doing a great work, and we needed to have the men show up. And my bishop is here tonight, so I am so delighted. I just want to say a few words before we begin, and just to say a little bit of why we focused in such a way. The impetus for this gathering came last October when I was at the summit against sex trafficking at the Temple. And David Marmon's organized an excellent summit last fall. And I noticed that all the speakers who got up were female. And I asked, where were the men? And he told me that the women were doing the work in these organizations against sex trafficking. And I said, well, we should do something about that. And so David and I met months ago, and we started planning this gathering tonight, that we would have a gathering, an event, where men would be invited to come and to become informed and to connect in some way through your work or through these organizations that we're going to hear about, to do this work against sex trafficking. Now, we do have some men doing the work, so I don't want to paint the picture that no men are involved, but we certainly need more. So tonight we have a diverse group of men, and it's interfaith. So I'm very, very pleased about this gathering. David Marmon, as I mentioned, is the co-chair of this event tonight, along with me from the Temple. I want to also thank Interfaith Children's Movement, Joy Bora, and Reverend Henderson, who are here supporting us as well as sponsors. I want to also thank my staff colleagues here at St. Luke's for this setup, for the food that you're enjoying, for the advertising and the tech support that we have here this evening. So it's really good. For all those who have done the work and all who've shown up, let's just give a round of applause for this gathering. Yes, very good. I want to keep us moving tonight because we have a tight schedule and we want to really bring out a very powerful piece tonight for you. So I just want to make one announcement about restrooms. Restrooms are, if you go out this door or you go here, just go around to your left. But going out here, you go all the way down and to the right, and the restrooms are on the right. We have a panel of men who will be introduced in a few minutes by David, but I want to introduce our first speaker, who is the president and CEO of Street Grace, and he'll say more about that organization. Let's welcome Mr. Bob Rogers.
The good news is it is 7:10 and we are still on schedule. I'm going to do everything I can to keep us that way. I'm going to take a 90-minute, very good presentation and cram it into 10. And so it's going to feel a little bit like skipping a rock over a water or something like that. We're not going to go too deep on any of it. Just want to make sure that we kind of come together on this. Just to give a brief context to it, you're going to hear from different organizations and folks that do different kinds of work, and we're going to look at this issue. We all have basically the same data and same information, but we look at the issue differently with the lens that we see it from. So you understand where I'm coming from on what we do. At Street Grace, our mission is to eradicate the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And simply put, we want to see a world where all children are free from sexual exploitation. What is human trafficking? In its most basic sense, as you think and talk and listen and hear about it, you're going to hear the words sex trafficking, human trafficking, and things like that used interchangeably. That's okay. In the broader sense, human trafficking, as you see it here, is a crime that occurs when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to control another person for the purposes of engaging in commercial sex acts or soliciting labor or services against the other person's will. So trafficking in a broader sense is a form of exploitation. There's human trafficking, there's labor trafficking. We don't talk much in the U.S. about organ trafficking. It's really not an issue here given the healthcare system with whatever faults and challenges you think that it has. It helps us avoid that particular piece. And sex trafficking, underneath sex trafficking would be the component that we kind of focus on, and that's the child sex trafficking. The scope of the problem, our commercial sexual exploitation of children is, again, any sexual activity involving a minor for which something of value is given or promised. The word promised is intentionally there, and that is part of the force, fraud, and coercion. By the numbers, when you look at the problem, in 2014, across the U.S., human trafficking globally was estimated to be a $150 billion illegal industry, the second largest, fastest growing. 99 billion of that, $100 billion is revenue that is produced from sex trafficking. That would be adult and minor sex trafficking. In 2020, NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, received over 17,000 reports of children. Last year, it skyrocketed to the largest number we've ever seen. 77% of those who are trafficked are exploited within their country of residence. So everything you see in the movies and everything you see and hear is true. It's just not the preponderance of what trafficking looks like. trafficking in our state and in our communities looks like our children being bought and sold by members of our community. Between 2003 and 2007, which unfortunately is some of the latest research that we've had done, the underground sex industry in Atlanta was a $290 million illegal business. Just to give some context, I'm not trying to be graphic, but just to give some context of that, do the math at $100, $120, or $150 per transaction. Think about the weight of $290 million. The state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta are known as sex hubs. It doesn't matter what research you look at, and it doesn't matter who did it. We're always in the top 5, so we don't need to get distracted debating the specifics of a piece of data here, there, or the other. The thing that we need to recognize is that we have a problem. August of 2009 to June of 2020, just in our, and there are other programs here that you're going to hear from tonight, just in our work alone, working with children who have been trafficked, just in that 11-year window, we worked with almost 4,300 kids. And on average, the Urban Research Institute did some research around Atlanta. On average, a trafficker in Atlanta was making between about $32,000 a week. Vulnerabilities, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I want to make sure that we at least kind of get our heads around the thing. Vulnerability is the key to trafficking. It's vulnerability and where weaknesses are exposed. Every time a youth runs away, there is a 17% chance that they're trafficked and resulted in that. 14.6% of boys and 25.6% of girls reported that someone they know has approached them and asked them to meet in person online. Someone they don't know has approached them online. Approximately 1 in 5 kids in the foster care system have been paid by someone to have sex. Children who have endured sexual abuse are 139% more likely to endure sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation of children. And you can see the numbers, but the vulnerabilities is what's important. You will notice that these aren't necessarily always impacted by economics, where you live, demographics. These are things, if you talk about kids and you think about minors, how do you even think about going through that stage without vulnerabilities to some degree? Georgia statistics, I really want to draw attention to probably just one of them at the top, and that's the technology aspect. This was done pre-COVID. So if you look at what has happened with technology and online exploitation and online grooming over the last 2.5 years, it's been absolutely phenomenal to see the growth and the expansion. The numbers that have been reported nationally and locally are unfortunately not just breaking records, but are exponentially breaking records. And then the bottom one, the foster care system, the number of children who reside in the Georgia foster care has increased by 71%, 72% technically, over the last 12 or 13 years. Warning signs, you can hear these and know many of these, but unfortunately, one of the things that we talk about in the trainings that we do with the healthcare system is multiple sexually transmitted infections, family history, hotel or motel keys. That seems odd, but you would be surprised how often a child could be found with a hotel or a motel key in these type situations. Cash or prepaid gift cards, irregular school attendance, new materials or goods, often it's technology, phones and things like that that just don't make sense, and explicitly sexual presence online. Again, when you think about social media and you look at some of the venues that kids are most active on, this is not really hard to stretch or to reach to. Those who have been victimized by this, you'll hear more again as we talk, but create a need system that they have to be surrounded with to move and process and heal and restore through this, of health services, basic needs, housing. Housing is one of the most significant steps to independence and healing, mental health, legal services, case management, and all of those things that have to wrap around people that are survivors and overcomers of trafficking, whether adults or children. And then just so that you can make note of it and have it, here's some hotlines locally and nationally that are available. Everybody can program these into their phone. Everybody can take a picture of it. Everybody can have somebody that they can reach out to. But you'll see a number of those again locally and nationally. And so before we move into the panel discussion and some Q&A, we've got a quick video for you to watch, and then David will be up.
The first time I was sold for sex, I was taken to a big house. Other girls are sitting there crying, and you could hear girls screaming upstairs. And I mean, I kind of had an idea at that point that I was going to get hurt. I did nothing to deserve this.
At 4.5 years old, I was lured from our front yard by a neighbor in our community. We were held there overnight where we were sexually and mentally abused. I thought that my neighbors were like my protectors. My community wasn't safe anymore to me, period.
Every year, up to 3,600 kids are sold for sex in the state of Georgia. But that's just a number on a piece of paper. It's easily thrown away. It's easily written off as a statistic. And it doesn't really affect us that much. Many times you hear the statement, that number can't be real. But it is. And we're going to show you in a way that's too big for us to continue to ignore.
Things were looking pretty good this morning on 85 southbound, but now we're seeing a delay.
Now, this is Chopper 46 video of a caravan of school buses. The group that put this on, called Street Grays, came together to speak out against this awful practice.
Human trafficking is a here problem wherever here is for you. The majority of sex trafficking that occurs is our children who are being bought and sold by members of our community.
We can stop it. It does not have to happen to any child. My wife and I have 2 daughters, and I just cannot imagine this happening to them. And if it was happening to them, I would just hope somebody would step up and help.
Human trafficking is the fastest growing, second largest illegal business on the planet. The 72 yellow school buses that are assembled here today, each representing 50 of Georgia's children, are a difficult reminder that these statistics represent lives.
I hate that my city is associated with such a horrible crime.
I feel like too many people just bypass things when they can really actually do something to help.
We remain committed to preventing any child from ending up in such a horrific nightmare and to rescuing those who may already be involved.
I hope that this opens people's eyes. When they see those numbers going by on the buses, they think of the kids in their lives.
I'm here to tell you, it is a long road to recovery, and no child deserves to have to experience something like this. It is a very hard topic to talk about. If you do not have this conversation with your children, somebody else is.
It's a significant event in the life of Atlanta to be able to rise up one city, one voice, one cause. You just have to be willing to step into the conversation and engage with kids.
Kids need to know that they can say no, that they have boundaries, and they need to feel like they're gonna be believed if something does happen, because if they have nobody to go to, they're not gonna say anything.
When we're talking about one of our most vulnerable populations, children, we don't have just a legal obligation, we have a moral obligation as well.
Nobody was there for me. That's why I lift my voice to make sure that we keep our children safe.
Doing what I do now and being able to help others is the only thing that makes my story worth it. Don't sit back and do nothing because you feel like the problem is too big and you can't make enough of a difference. Because you can.
Thank you, Bob, very much for your presentation and for that video. I'm David Marmons. Once again, I lead the Temple's Social Justice Institute Anti-Trafficking Group, and we are proud, along with the Interfaith Children's Movement, to co-sponsor this event. And thank you very much to Horace and all the staff here at St. Luke's for putting this on. We appreciate everybody being here, and we especially appreciate you folks for taking the lead on it. The reason we're here is to educate and encourage men to help be part of the solution to our very terrible sex trafficking problem. Thank you, not only here in this city, but all over. We have 3 experts to discuss 2 basic questions. Why men have resisted engaging in this effort, and how can they be part of the solution? So let me just give a brief introduction to these 3, and we'll get to those 2 questions. You've already heard from Bob Rogers, who is the CEO of Street Grace, which focuses on what I think the phrase would be demand reduction in this problem, and has done amazing work through Street Grace for many years now. Next to him is Sir Streeter, the coordinator for the Georgia Coalition to Combat Human Trafficking, which is the statewide law enforcement-based task force that addresses all forms of human trafficking. I want to make a note of Sir's past work for Homeland Security for about 30 years, is that right? And investigated and handled many special projects involving anti-sex trafficking efforts. So we thank you for being here as well. And on the end there is Dr. Brian Thomas, who runs the Rescuing Hope Center at Wellspring Living. And if you're not familiar, Wellspring Living provides shelter and programming to help trafficking survivors, and the Receiving Hope Center, the Receiving Hope Center in particular is a 90-day temporary facility where trafficking survivors have a place where they can get medical support, academic support, mentoring, other therapeutic and stabilization services. It's a very important service to the community that Wellspring Living and the Receiving Hope Center provide. So thank all 3 of you for being here. And as I said, we really only have 2 questions that we want to talk about for a little while. So take your time. Why do men have a hard time getting involved in the anti-trafficking effort? And maybe put a little different way, why are anti-trafficking nonprofits, law enforcement, and volunteers, as we learned at our event last fall, predominantly female? So, Mr. Streeter, why don't we start with you and your thoughts on why that's the case?
Yes, certainly, David. First off, it's an honor to be here, and I'm very happy to know that the vision that David and Horace and everyone else is involved with this, to put this topic together. So the question that you asked is, why aren't there a lot of men involved with this? Well, similar to what Bob does with Street Grace, there's a demand. And I think part of our culture feeds into that demand for men, who are engaged in trafficking. And so we have to come up with ways to be able to have the courage from men to address these issues within our environments. One thing in my community, we have the barbershop. And the barbershop is usually that place where men get together and they have these conversations that range from sports to politics and so forth. But you never hear anyone addressing human trafficking in those spaces. And I think it may be taboo for a man to come up and to spark a conversation about sex trafficking in that type of environment, because that man would probably be considered to be soft or not manly enough, because culture has it to where men we have to be dominant, that pimp culture, that culture of being dominant over women and so forth. So I think we need to be bold and we need to be courageous as men in sparking those conversations within those communities where men are more prevalent, the barbershops, the basketball courts, and so forth. So again, we have to be strong, we have to be courageous, and we have to be able to stand up against anyone who may ostracize us in having those conversations. But before we spark those conversations in those environments, we have to educate ourselves, so when we do have those conversations, we want to be able to really know what we're talking about in those particular spaces where men are more prevalent.
Thank you. Dr. Thomas, what are your thoughts on why men have such a difficult time getting involved in this particular social justice issue?
Great question. I think, for one, to go back to what you said, you're spot on what you said. I appreciate that. I'm glad to be here to talk to you all tonight. I think men just don't have the education behind it to understand what it means to be trafficked. I've spoken with many men around the state, and I understand that they don't understand what that looks like. The age requirement to consent to sexual aspect of it. They don't really know, most of the men that I talk to don't really know that there is an age minimum that you must meet to consent to sex. I think in the past, men have been labeled as a boogeyman, and most places don't really embrace. When I came to Wellspring, there was only one man in a company of 95 women that worked there. So it was like, well, why aren't there any men working here? Because they didn't feel at that time that, I'll put this tactfully, men would be the best fit for certain positions enrolled in the company. And they wanted to change that because they wanted to demonstrate and showcase men in a more positive light. I was the second man they hired in the last 15 years because they had not had any men that were able to meet the needs of the community and in the business. So to answer your question, I just think it's a lack of training, education, understanding around what it means to be trafficked.
Thank you. Finally, Bob, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think those are two excellent answers, and I agree with them. I think practically speaking, too, there are a couple of things. One is, at least historically, and we have the privilege to interact with and work with and speak at a lot of men's events, men have been the predominant consumers of pornography. And there is this issue of, if I am struggling with something, how do I stand up in front of others and proclaim this is what we're going to do? And that feeling of being duplicitous. There's also, I think, a very practical and maybe even a bigger issue, and that is this space, this fight, this movement it has been kickstarted, it has been led, and it has been, and most of the impact historically has been from women. You look, this city is no different than any other city. You look back at former Mayor Shirley Franklin when she launched the Dear John campaign and this study and said, I'm tired of people asking me questions that I don't have real meaningful answers for. Let's do some research. And you look back at, Chief Magistrate Judge Nina Hickson, who wrote the article. I mean, you just look at the kind of the pioneers in this space, and it's been women. And when you speak to a group of women, there's this something that rises up in them when you know the statistics are 1 in every 4 females have experienced some form of sexual exploitation by their 18th birthday. And men are often, or not often, we are overwhelmingly the majority of the offenders. So in this fight, we've had a hard time finding a role. And what is the place for us? Because I don't mean this in a trivial way. We like to do manly things and we like to do things that have an impact. But it's probably inappropriate for us to be sitting in safe houses and trying to help navigate through restoration and early healing processes. Not probably, it is for the most part. But now that we're beginning to address the demand side of it, and now that we're beginning to address the buyers of sex and the traffickers, the role for men in this fight has the doors have been swung wide open, because we can engage with other men who are struggling with this issue. We can engage with other men who are struggling and trying to find their way. And so I think we're at the front of a significant movement where men get engaged and not just support the role and the work that females and women have done, but have a place of our own in making progress in this. And I think that's what a comprehensive approach is going to look like. And I think that's where we're going to see us reach the tipping point on this.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned the number of men that are the buyers and the people that are doing the trafficking in large part. But I think a lot of men don't realize how many of the people being trafficked are male, are boys. I mean, at Wellspring, Brian, what's the percentages of boys versus girls that are actually being trafficked?
To be exact, we've received since 2020, March 15, we've received 225 students altogether. 4 of them have been male, 2 trans, 1 LGBTQ, 2 AI, and 1 who identified as heterosexual. Because most young men don't want to identify, confirm themselves to be a victim or a survivor, because they don't want you to know that they've been violated. So they hide it, don't report it, or deny that it even happened.
So is it fair to say that the number of males that come to Wellspring are not representative of the percentage of males that are actually being
Not at all. That's due to being, I guess, the shame attached to it. Because if you come to us, we already know that something happened to you. And most young men that are between 12 and 17 don't want to, I guess, appear to be violated in that area. So they don't confirm themselves as being sex victims.
Gotcha. Now, but regardless of if the victims are male or female, most of the people do, if I'm asking this more to the panel, are most of the people trafficking and purchasing sex from minors especially, or what percentage of men compared to women is that?
I would say 95%, the 90s or something like that. Would you agree?
I think most of the research, and you could speak to it for law enforcement, but I think most of the data, even if it wasn't research that I've seen, is probably in the 90+%.
Yeah, it's a very high percentage.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I was speaking at an event this past weekend, and on my PowerPoint, I had that percentage, and it's slipping my mind, but it's very high of a percentage of men involved.
I'll tell you this, during a 18-month window, we did some demand reduction work and intercepted phone calls from prospective buyers of sex who were attempting to purchase sex with children, male or female. Of just over 15,000 phone calls that we intercepted over that 18-month window, only one of them was identifiably a female.
Yeah.
Now, and we're getting a little off track here, but I think this part is also worth mentioning. While the actual purchases are men, a lot of women are involved in the recruiting of people that are being trafficked, right? So there are women involved in the problem too.
Absolutely. I think they are recruiters, they're groomers. From my experience, my students tell me that, they met someone online. They became a friend. They started to share ideas and share pictures online and techniques for hair and doing different things faster and better with makeup and stuff like that. And they meet out and become a mentor or a big sister or whatever. And they go to a party and they go to different things, and before you know it, whatever, they're in a space where it's just them and other people that are of age, and before you know it, they're in a space where they can't get out, and then they're stuck.
Yeah, I would also add that many of those women who act as recruiters or bottoms were once CSEC victims themselves. Mm-hmm. And they have kind of grown into that life. And they entice, like you say, and recruit other women to engage in that life as well. So in many instances, from a law enforcement perspective, we may run across some type of enforcement action where we may run across a recruiter or a trafficker who's a female. As we hear their stories, we come to find out that they've been trafficked as a child as well. So now we have to change our focus from being, from taking a prosecutorial perspective into now trying to rehabilitate this person who has obviously been trafficked and been traumatized at some point in their life to put them in the position that they're in.
And just to add that, we find that where I am right now in Wellspring, our students are also recruiters as well. The young girls who come into our center, they also take down names of girls who are also in our care to reattach themselves to them post-discharge. So they will find out what's your IG name and keep that paper, that data, and when they're discharged, they'll go out and reach out to them and say, hey, we're in Murder Beach, whatever, for the weekend. We'll pick you up, whatever. So not just women, also young girls as well, also recruiters.
Well, I know when I think about my teenage daughter, I know she's far more susceptible to being groomed or drawn away by a 25-year-old woman who looks, just young enough to be cool,
yeah,
but safe enough because she's a woman. And so I know I hear that a lot in this world as well, that the women are used to lure other younger girls. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about if men want to get engaged, what can they do to get involved in any anti-trafficking efforts, whether it's helping survivors or demand reduction efforts. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about Wellspring?
Yeah, I would say
might be able to do that.
We need volunteers to step up and demonstrate some positive male influence. Most times, the young ladies, every man they've encountered has been transactional, quid pro quo type of behaviors, whatever. So they will definitely, the young ladies they've been conditioned to be transactional with everything they do with men. And even when I got to the job, they tried to, coerce me to provide them with lunches or whatever, and they'll tell you, how are you? Are you married? You have children? And, they have the eye contact down pat. They can tell you, is your wife pretty? Where you live? You have a nice car? And they've been trained to do these things to men outside of our facility, So you have to unlearn that behavior and drill down to identify why they behave in this way. But to answer your question, we need more men to demonstrate a positive showing and so girls can see that, not all men are the same. There are some good men out here, and they can show them because every man they've known has been either an abuser, a trafficker, uncles, grandparents, whatever, men in their lives, per se.
Well, are there opportunities at places like Wellspring and other nonprofits in the city for people to take on mentoring roles or to help in some way?
Absolutely. We have a volunteer program where men can sign up via online, wellspringliving.org, and they can also volunteer to come in and do projects, gardening projects, help with restorative practices in the workplace, in education. We do tutoring throughout the day. Whatever you can do that's a benefit for life skills, cooking, culinary arts and crafts. Whatever you can do, we appreciate any type of donations and volunteerism.
How about if people aren't comfortable with something quite so interactive as far as, do y'all need supplies and other things on occasion? Is there a place where people can go to find that
Yes,
information?
wellspringliving.org is where you can go and donate and provide support, whether it's monetary or if you want to drop off shampoo or toothpaste, whatever, those type of things, the toiletries, whatever, we appreciate those as well. Many times we've had men to provide books for our library, online programming to support us with the kids who are online virtually doing schoolwork, whatever, video programming, Amazon gift cards for the kids that like to look at certain movies, whatever, so things like that will always be appreciated.
And something we'll do to anybody that registered is we'll be sending out information for Wellspring Living and other nonprofits and information. So if you want to get engaged, you just have to click a link and go do it. Bob, anything you want to add as far as opportunities for people to get engaged and help out?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Just again, I echo what's been said. But I also think there's some other, one of the things that has helped all of us be better than we are by ourselves is whatever your gifts, whatever your talents. We have 60 attorneys who volunteer pro bono to help get records expunged from people who have been victimized by this and committed or were charged with crimes during the victimization. We have technology companies that have come alongside of us and just gifted us with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of help and technology support to build this chatbot that we have that even as we sit here right now is online intercepting phone calls from people attempting to purchase sex with children. We have people that have brought all kinds of gifts and skill sets and talents, and I think that's important. So don't always, we're not for profits, so I don't want to speak for all of us, but I feel pretty comfortable. None of us would turn down a check tonight, but we need more than that if we really want to be exponentially better. The second thing I would say, and I don't mean this in a trivial way at all, volunteer and get involved, but start at home. Men need to start at home. When we talk at men's conferences, one of the things that'll happen is guys will come up afterwards and they'll be all amped up and they'll say, man, if you would pass out baseball bats with the address of a trafficker written on it or somebody who's purchasing our kid, we will have this problem solved by tomorrow morning. And sometimes I believe them. Other times it's like, okay, let's just think that through. And let me ask you a simple question. When is the last time, sitting around the house or wherever you were, with your wife or friends or kids or family or whoever it is that you have influence over, that even a commercial during a sports game came on and you just turned the TV off for 60 seconds and said, Let me tell you why we're not going to watch that. That is not how I see your mother or your sister or your brother, whatever it is. That's not how we value people. That's not what we were designed to do. We're not objects for each other's pleasure, fully. I mean, in an exploitative kind of way. And then just turn it back on and go. But it's this idea of just having men struggle with this, in my opinion, more than women do, and that is just be willing to have a series of awkward conversations with the kids or people that you have influence in their lives. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be an expert. They won't most likely remember all that stuff. They'll just remember that somebody cared enough to start a conversation, and when something does or doesn't happen or they have questions, they know they've got somebody to come ask. Somebody told us all 50 years ago that we don't have to talk about sex around the dinner table anymore, and we were so excited that we just said, fantastic. But kids didn't quit asking questions. They just get the answers from different places now.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Thanks, Bob. Sir, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would add, and just to kind of piggyback off what Bob said, I think volunteerism is very important. And the reason I say that is because I practice it and utilize it myself. But before you volunteer in those spaces, especially with youth, educate yourselves first so that you know what you're talking about. But immediately upon retiring from HSI, having experience, encountering trafficking victims, in the field as a law enforcement officer, I felt it was important for me to give back. So immediately upon retiring, I volunteered with the Safe Harbor House down in Brunswick, Georgia, where I live. And you say being, doing something that you're comfortable with doing. I'm a sports fanatic. I love basketball, I love football, I love sports. So my love of sports, I was able to parlay that into having Safe Harbor create a sporting event for youth, ages, I believe the ages were 8 to 13, where we had soccer and kickball and stuff like that, where we engage with the youth. But I also tapped the different victim service providers in the Glenn County and Camden County areas. So I had them there as well. So as those kids played sports and we had a good time, we had them go through in small groups and go through these different victim service provider stations where they asked them questions, they made some games out of it to make them aware that there are services out there if they were exploited in some way. Again, even through my church, I volunteered in youth programs where we've taught young men and young women life skills. And then we just parlay those conversations into what human trafficking and exploitation is. So if you are able and fortunate to find yourself those opportunities to volunteer, that's the strongest recommendation that I can provide as far as men getting into those spaces to give back and to educate the youth.
Thank you. Thank you. I can tell you that after almost 20 years of practicing law, 6 or 7 years ago, I needed something else in my life to be more enriching than my law practice was providing to me. And I certainly never was able to, I'm not yet able to quit my day job to take care of things. But the volunteering that I do in this area and others is some of the most selfish time I spend, because there's nothing makes me feel better than when I'm doing things like this that's different than what I did at work or in other areas of life up until then. And so I highly recommend it if you just want to be a happier person, help other people. Men, one of the things that came up in our earlier discussions preparing for this, I don't think we really talked much about tonight, is just, it's not just this issue. Men are just historically not the best volunteers. It's just the numbers. More women volunteer. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it's not even close in our country. And we can do better, right? We can do better. So I appreciate you folks being out here tonight in support of this and trying to do better. And before we go, if people have questions for the panel, we certainly welcome you to come up and ask. Horace, did you want to take over from here? Yes. And say some concluding remarks?
Yes. So if you have a question, because this is being recorded, we're asking that you would come here and ask your question. I just want to, first of all, just thank this panel for what you've given. when I came to St. Luke's, I served on the commission against sex trafficking for the Diocese of Atlanta. And it delights me that the Reverend Victoria Jarvis, who is now the chair of that commission for the diocese, is here. And our bishop, the Right Reverend Robert Christopher Wright, is here. And I think our bishop wants to say a few words. And then if you have a question following the bishop, just feel free to come up.
Well, why don't we just get the questions going? If there's questions, that's more important. I just want to tack on at the end. But if you've got questions for these folks, let's get that going.
Any questions from anyone, please come.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'm a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church and received an email today suggesting that I come. I'm glad I did. Couple of things. One, I'm an older gentleman, so back in the day, the three vices that we were concerned about as a young person were porn, weed, and gambling. Gambling's legalized, weed is legalized, and porn is just a big part of our culture, which is strange, right? I kind of blame, to a certain degree, our generation for allowing that to permeate our society. In the discussion that you gentlemen had, you mentioned how impactful the internet is in soliciting, right?
Yes.
And probably more with the phones, because many people have phones. There's always been an issue with, in my view, the etiquette of a phone for a young person. And it would seem that with the advocacy that we have here to prevent child sex trafficking, that we would want to partner with cell company providers and say, look, we need some etiquette, we need some education, we need billboards for the teens or the young people to try to prevent them being influenced that way, but also for men to say, you guys need to stop this porno stuff because it's having this profound impact on the nation, but particularly in Atlanta, because in Atlanta it is a chronic problem with the high national ratings with respect to how much it occurs here as opposed to other places. So I guess my question is there some consideration being given to have internet companies, cell companies assist? You mentioned the support that you're getting from technology companies to identify callers and things of that nature, but I'm talking in addition to that, the etiquette of using the phone, right? And then soliciting some funds to maybe advertise in a greater way, particularly in Atlanta.
I would add to that, I tell parents all the time, from what I've seen in the last 3 years, whatever, the gateway to your child's bedroom is through the cell phone. Every child I know that I've talked to has had the experience through the cell phone. From Instagram to Facebook Messenger, Snapchat, everybody that I've talked to in the last 3 years, whatever, has met someone that brought them to us through the cell phone. And parents need to know how to provide safeguards and do pop-up checkups, whatever, something to monitor, because back when I was a kid, we had one house phone, and mom could hear upstairs what I was talking about on the phone, But now, they have their own phone, and you can't tap into the phone because it's private. So you made a great point, sir. That cell phone is the gateway to your child's bedroom.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't recall any type of partnerships that law enforcement or victim advocacy services have had with cell phone companies. And I think that's a great idea for us to partner with them. But in addition to the cell phone being that gateway to pornography and so forth, traffickers are now utilizing gaming consoles, the Xboxes, the PlayStations, because kids now can go and play a simulation game with someone across the other side of the world. And these traffickers are aware of that. They're very, very savvy.
Yes.
So in addition to partnering with cell phone companies, I think we need to partner with these gaming platforms. There was a gentleman when I worked in Northern California for HSI. He was our Intel analyst, and he left, and he was hired by one of the Silicon Valley companies as a Intel analyst for a gaming company to address online solicitation of children through those platforms. So, but to your point, sir, very good question, and I think we need to maybe start engaging and partnering with those types of companies to get their buy-in to help prevent this problem.
Yeah, you have, you can come, I'm gonna be brief. You may not remember, but it was, 10 or 12 or 15 years ago that Hyatt and then Hilton and Marriott and all of them started removing the on-demand pornography from the rooms. That had financial implications for them as an organization, but they did it because the pressure built up to the point that they could no longer look away, and they had to determine what's the public perception worth, what's the dollar value worth, and they made the decision. You saw a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years ago, during the pandemic, it seems like it's been 11 years, but Apple came forward with some image recognition software and some things that they did for their updates that could begin to identify things that were believed to have been child pornography. Comcast is taking some steps, not near enough, and some of the other cable companies are. There's an organization called NCOSE, N-C-O-S-E is what it all stands for, out of DC, that is doing a really good job with Netflix and some of these larger organizations really helping pressure mount on them. I think we'll see some of that over the next couple of years. We're trying to get simple things like when you go buy a phone, just buy it with the filters already turned on. And then there's the reality too, though, that most anybody will figure out how to get around them, by the time they get home with the phone. So it still goes back to that series of really awkward conversations at home. But we are way behind, but there's a lot of things that are in the works right now that I suspect over the next year or two, because of mounting public pressure, there will be some responses to.
Thanks. I'm John Zintak. On the prevention side, I appreciate your comment about the baseball bat. Know that that's a little out of, but to that, infiltrating the systems, right, and trying to working towards that prevention side. We have such a big convention business here, and I think everybody knows that coming in and out of Atlanta, fly and all that kind of stuff. The hotels, right? I mean, I would imagine that most of the activity is going to be in quote-unquote public places. Has there been an effort on law enforcement's part and from a prevention standpoint to really try to infiltrate these systems to see what can be done to kind of cut some of it off at the source?
Yeah, from a law enforcement perspective, when there's the anticipation that there's going to be a huge event in Atlanta, the Super Bowl, NBA All-Star Game, or even other types of conventions that would bring in a lot of people to the city, law enforcement will engage in proactive law enforcement enforcement actions, such as hotel stings, reverse stings, so forth, to help prevent some of those activities. Obviously, law enforcement is limited in what they can do, but we try to go out there and show some type of presence to try to counteract some of those issues as well. Then again, I've been part of when I was working, I've been part of instances where we've gone out and we've educated the strip club industry. I remember giving a presentation to, there's a huge strip club or adult entertainment association in the state of Florida. And I remember giving training to them, and the people who was part of that training that I provided were the dancers, were the people that worked security, the owners of these clubs. If we can engage in those associations and kind of educate them, that can be another preventative measure when these large events occur within the city of Atlanta.
I'm going to call to the microphone one of our parishioners, John Tonge, who has taken on, you mentioned hotels, taken on that industry. His work as an attorney has been a ministry for him, and I just think his story is very powerful. So I want him to share some of that.
I didn't know I was sharing a story today. But yeah, and so I started doing this, I guess, in 2019, and so when people ask what I do, I sue hotels for sex trafficking victims. That's my job. And it actually started in the church in there, which is a real long story, and it was kind of impactful during a group that Ed had here with the Universal Christ book, actually. Anyway, that was a real weird night for me. But the hotels are correct, and the convention thing is correct, but like, as Bob said, what's really true is this happens where the customers are, and it happens in the northern suburbs of the city. It happens in Smyrna over by the Braves Stadium, and it happens there because there's a lot of men that want to buy sex in that area. And so it's not, it happens down at the airport, but I think it happens more in the Marietta, Alpharetta, Dunwoody area than it happens in the airport, and people need to kind of, reorient how they talk about it in Atlanta with that in mind. I mean, these are local people that do this. There's forums online where you can kind of you can watch these anonymous buyers talk about what they're doing, and I mean, it's a daily 4 or 5 times a week thing for a lot of these people, and it's happening all over the place. When we filed the first lawsuits against hotels in 2019, and following that, we have seen that they have done a lot more now, and I think it's like Bob said, it's when it's more expensive, to allow it to happen than it is to stop it, then they can do stuff all of a sudden to try to stop it and take measures and do training and things. But when I started this, I thought we would do lawsuits, and it would be like, they turned a blind eye, or they should have known, or like maybe they missed it or something like that. And the truth is that they just know, right? Like the people at the hotel know what's going on at the hotel, and the people in the area know what's happening in the area. And it's just been allowed to happen because it's a culture. And I've talked to good people who I think are housekeepers and employees at the hotels, and it's like working in a war zone. And so, they're like, I get paid $9 an hour. I'm supposed to be the one to stop sex trafficking at this place. And so it's just, and it's an accepted thing in that area. It becomes an accepted thing in the business. And it's really toxic, and it overtakes the whole thing. And I think there's a huge misperception, particularly among buyers, that many more women are doing this as voluntary sex workers than they are sex trafficking victims. And that's because when a buyer shows up, he doesn't see a man sitting on the bed beside the girl, and so he assumes everybody is here willingly and doing it because they want to, and that's very rarely the case. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody has any questions there, but yeah. Oh, about that. Oh, and yeah, we have had some success, and so we settled the first case, I think the first public settlement, and it's kind of tragic. We got, one of our clients passed away. She was 17, and she had not really gotten out of a reckless lifestyle, but the other one, actually, she turned 20 in March, and she's pregnant and had a baby in March, and we settled her case for $2.4 million, and she took it. And, like if somebody was going to give me that, I would buy a car and like something else stupid, And she asked for $10,000, and she put the rest of it away for her child, like with a trust. She can't touch it. It's like, I don't know. I can barely even talk about it. Like, I'm so proud of her choosing to do that. So, yeah. And so for her, it has, changed the entire trajectory of her life, basically. And that's because she was strong, and it's the decision she made. And then, sorry, I get all emotional about stuff. And the other thing I'll say is that as a, probably the most powerful part of my practice is the number of times that I'm told, I'm the only man that never, that was there for them or didn't give up, So you can do that too. So, sorry.
know this is 100 men, but I had to say a little something. So just, I think it's wonderful for us to focus on the ways that technology is perpetuating a lot of these crimes. I think that there are two big industries as well that we cannot overlook. And that is shared ride systems, because they're getting them some kind of way, and also Airbnbs, because that is the new wave of living. Rideshare is important because it is systemic. If a driver picks up a passenger, they don't know where they're taking them. They don't know the nature of that trip. And there is no mechanism in those systems to help a driver say, this person in my car needs help, because that ride is being tracked by whoever is perpetuating the crime. And so that is perhaps untapped, or maybe I don't know if it's being tapped. And so that would be part of my question, is what systems or what approaches, or if any, have been considered regarding rideshare as well as Airbnb type lodging.
I think that, going back to what I mentioned earlier about partnerships, we need to partner, or law enforcement, whoever needs to partner with those types of industries, to the point where if it's just maybe just some signage in the rideshare that says, hey, we are in support of combating human trafficking. If you feel that you are a victim, here's a number that you can call. And it can be visible to that passenger. And they know that, wow, okay, I can call this number. Or now knowing that this is posted in this Uber or whatever, maybe I can engage with this driver and he can take me to that place, to Wellspring Living or the CACGA or something like that. I think it has to be, partnerships. On the labor trafficking side of things, with the Georgia Statewide Trafficking Task Force, we are engaged, or we are starting negotiations with the Chamber of Commerce. We had a meeting with the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce to engage businesses to combat human trafficking by putting posters and signage, and actually establishing a pledge with CJCC to combat human trafficking by putting signage in those hotels, such as what you see in the airports and so forth. But I think partnership is big, convincing these companies of the problem and having them engaged by, like I said, just as simple as putting, when you enter that Airbnb, having a sign up there that says, we are aware of trafficking, and if you need help, here's where you can call.
Thank you.
I'll just add briefly to that I know, and I think it kicked off around the Super Bowl in Atlanta, but Uber has allowed, and I'm making an assumption now that they're still doing it, has allowed for driver training on how to identify and spot and report things like that. I know there have been some incidents where reports have come and they've been acted on. I don't know the volume, and I don't know what they're currently doing, and I'll only mention them by name because they're the only ones that I know. Airbnb, I'm not sure how they've responded to the trafficking issue, and candidly, I haven't run across much of Airbnb. In the individual trafficking issue, where we hear about it is where they're hosting larger parties and gatherings where a lot of inappropriate things, including sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and other adult things like that do occur. And I know they've begun to crack down on that, but I don't know from a training perspective what they've done. I do know that Uber has done training, and last I heard was continuing to do driver training on that.
Okay, I see we're at time. We started just a few minutes later. So we'll hear from Bishop Wright.
So you don't need much from me. I just want to add my voice and say thank you to our panelists here, and thank you to the Temple, and to David, and to Horace, and to ICM. Thank you. God's got to be smiling some kind of where, right? You got Lutherans and Baptists and Jews and Episcopalians and all the rest of us sitting here thinking about how to respect the dignity of every human being. And Jonathan, don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, there it is, man. There it is. What can one person do? There's the sermon. You don't need a preacher to do that. there it is. If I understand Jewish scripture and if I understand Christian scripture, God sets a few guys, a few gals' hearts on fire, and then a movement pops up, and then things get changed. And so, if you know me, you should expect this. I'm inviting you to, on the drive home, to our comfortable homes, think about that. Think about the ways in which God is setting your heart on fire to respect the dignity of every human being, because that ultimately is the best religion there is that we love enough to care for those who are experiencing lovelessness in this world. So thank you so very much for being here. It's a big deal to get a bunch of guys out on a Wednesday. Thank you so very much. It makes my heart very glad. And thank you, St. Luke's, very much.
I also want to thank Don Plummer for his work in spreading the word and connecting with the press. Mary Margaret, a photographer from the diocese, to take some photographs so this can be widely spread, so we can let the world know what happened here tonight as witnesses. And Bishop Wright has been a strong advocate supporting this work of anti-domestic minor sex trafficking, so thank you for the work that you've done. And thank all of you, and Reverend Cassandra Henderson, who spoke earlier from ICM. So I want to thank all of you who've gathered, many of you in your professions. A lot of attorneys are here tonight. Think about John Tonge as a great model for us in how you can make a difference in eradicating this sin and evil, as I said, among us. So want to thank the panel and everyone who has gathered tonight. Please go forth and do this work and be witnesses to be able to bring about change in our city and our country and our world. Thank you. Good night.